Howdy, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Dusty Trails and Tall Tales podcast, where we keep the spirit of the Old West alive. Today's guest is someone whose work boldly redefines the Western genre, blending sharp historical insight with unforgettable characters. He's an author, lawyer, and publisher. We're proud to welcome James Ciccone to the show. James, thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Matt.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
A lot of times people ask me, how is it that you came to begin writing Westerns? Well, I won't bore your audience with the minutiae of my life story. However, I do feel compelled to highlight a couple of bullet points on the timeline.
Okay.
I grew up in the wilds of upstate New York, a place that was probably only recently contacted by civilization. So we are way out in what some people would characterize as nowhere. But I would characterize that nowhere is really everywhere, because we have at night, we have that canopy of stars we don't see in the urban settings, and we go in the fields and learn how to capture horses, ride horses bareback, and dream about faraway places. So what that does for a kid growing up is it feeds the imagination, because a great deal of your life occurs in your imagination. I've always been interested in writing. I was published as a teenager. I attended Colgate University and fortunately met an author named Joseph Bruchac early on who took an interest in my writing. From there, it was on to law school. I spent about a year teaching college writing between college and law school. From there, it was on to law school, and I spent about 2 decades as a trial lawyer. And then, when I was no longer active in the practice of law, I began to dedicate myself finally to the ambition to write. Now, how did I come to the Western genre? Is probably a subsidiary question.
Yes,
Funny story. After no longer practicing law, I spent about a year writing this long Dostoevsky-esque novel with layers of metaphor and obscure literary allusions and all the other complexities, including graphic violence. And fortunately, before submitting this, what I like to call a telephone book, to a commercial publisher, I thought to submit it to my sister first to get her take on the novel. A word about my sister: she's wonderfully erudite and has been a voracious reader from an early age. So she has this telephone book for about 2 weeks, and finally the telephone rings. It's my sister. She says, "Well, I finished reading the novel," followed by a pregnant pause. I said, "Well, okay, you finished reading the novel. What do you think?" Followed by a second pregnant pause and an audible sigh. Finally, she said, "Oh, Jimmy, why don't you just write a book somebody might like to read?" So there was an idea to hit me right between the eyes. And I said, "Pray tell, dear sister, what is it in your view that people might actually like to read?" She said, "Westerns. Everybody loves a Western. Western radio, Western television, Western books. Westerns, Westerns, Westerns." So the Western it was.
Yeah.
My debut, as you know, probably know, is a novel called A Good Day to Die, published by Prairie Rose Publications in Oklahoma. Two wonderfully literate women, um, Livia Reisner and Cheryl Pearson. I think they're no longer active as publishers, but they remain active as writers. And that
Yeah,
was,
I know who they are. They're great writers.
yes, they are. So that gives you a flavor of how it started.
Yeah. Well, what is it about your westerns that make them different from most other writers?
Okay. My main concern about the Western as a genre is that it not be a rigid form, that it not be static. that instead that it's flexible enough to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not flexible enough to evolve, it runs the risk of flirting with or becoming perilously close to the cliff of obsolescence. But if it's a flexible form that's dynamic and inclusive, I don't think we have those issues. So the first up is subject matter. Um, like to think that the characters in my stories include all demographic groups in the Old West, including black characters. Not black characters as comical and hideous stereotypes, but as real people. So that is the first distinction, is the inclusion of black characters as they existed in the 1800s. Now, as Western writers, we're very interested in historical accuracy, right down to the last button on the clothing of some of the characters. So, if we are interested in historical accuracy, it would follow that we should be interested in the population that lived in the Old West. That included Native Americans and included African Americans and other groups. Included them not as hideous stereotypes, but as real people. So that's the first point of distinction. And that's not to suggest that other stories don't include authentic African American characters, but mine certainly do. A Good Day to Die, you have on the screen there, is the protagonist is a mixed race man, Cherokee Bill, who is part Cherokee, he's part black, and he's part European. So that's indication of how inclusive that story is.
Yeah. Well, what drew you to writing about Cherokee Bill?
Uh, it was that he is a um, alpha male African American protagonist, and his nickname was Native American for wild. He's very wild. He was a wild person, and it was a colorful character. And I thought it would be very interesting to amplify his history. And then, in the interest of editorial balance, the second novel, Stagecoach Justice, was written around a black female protagonist on the Western frontier in the 1800s. That would be Stagecoach Justice, and then that's Mary Fields.
Yeah. I don't think I have a cover for that one.
That's fine. This is it.
Okay.
I just might have one handy here.
All right. Well, that's good. Well, what's the reader response been like toward your books?
I find that I get the best reviews from probably the people that are a little bit more literate in the Western genre.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I haven't quite figured out how to win a book award or how to generate a large following. But I like to think the literature stands on all fours on its own. The last book, The Horse, which is this one, that's um,
That one?
that one. Yeah, I like to think that one's my best yet, and that one's
Why do
available.
you feel that's your best?
I think the writing reaches a higher level. One of my goals as a writer is that each book in the process is a little stronger than the last one. And my theory is if every effort's a little bit better than the last one, eventually we have to get this somewhere good.
Yeah.
And I think The Horse is my finest novel yet. It's set in Saratoga Springs, 1800s, while the Civil War rages on in various pockets of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a part of the society that has the wherewithal to race horses. in Saratoga, while other parts of the population um, are embroiled in a civil war. And I think that dichotomy is fairly interesting.
How do you balance historical accuracy with compelling storytelling?
Not wishing to sound formulaic, but a James Ciccone novel essentially will have a certain structure that's perhaps a little different than the traditional Western. It starts off, of course, with the setting, and then from the setting, we have an inciting incident or incidents, plural, which creates a conflict between the characters. And the story takes its time resolving that conflict, much like a Shakespearean sonnet spends the first three quatrains building a conflict that's resolved in the last two lines or the couplet. So the inciting incident creates a conflict between the characters. The conflict raises a dramatic question that the story itself works to resolve in the denouement, in the final part of the book. So without trying to sound formulaic, that would be the structure of a typical James Ciccone novel. And my grandson wants to pop in just for 1 second.
Okay.
Hello, here's my grandson. This is
Oh,
I dedicated the first book to him. Okay, so right there you go. So now he's a television star.
he's a YouTuber now.
That's it.
Well, how do you feel your background as a trial lawyer influences your characters and how you write dialogue?
Interestingly enough, just about every story winds up having a horse or horses in it and a trial in it. And
Yeah,
so, having the background of studying the law in all of its permutations and practicing for over 2 decades as a trial lawyer, um, and you'll notice in the horse, there are various twists and turns that end up in the courtroom scene toward the end of the story. Um, some readers say those are the best scenes in the novel, and probably because I spent all those years trying cases.
yeah.
Now, on the question of race, um, we talked about including black characters in the stories.
Mm-hmm.
On the question of race, it's interesting to me that if we look at society historically from the 1800s, we evolved extremely fast as a society. We start out on horseback and horse-drawn carriages and wagons, and then very soon thereafter, we are flying in airplanes. Um, we developed the telephone. We developed the railways, and we made it to the moon. And we did all those things in under 200 years. However, when it comes to the question of race, we seem transfixed in time. And arguably, that question has not evolved in over 200 years.
Yeah.
They're the same conflicts and the same questions. And so those are some of the issues that my Western stories touch upon. I mean, we don't look at the Western as one-dimensional form. We want to mention it as a form that includes symbolism and is concerned with the universals. At least that's what I'm interested in. So when
Yeah.
you're reading a story like The Horse, and there's a scene in The Horse where the horse is slaughtered in the barn. Um, it's very difficult for the reader to overlook the symbolism in on Shed Row in the barn when the protagonist lights a gas lamp and the light illuminates the entire barn up to the rafters. Um,
Yeah.
it's a metaphor that suggests that there's a religious dimension to the story.
Well, you've mentioned that you're a publisher. Do you publish your own books, or do you accept work from other writers? And what are you looking for?
Okay, the first two books were published by a commercial publisher. That's Prairie Rose Publications in Oklahoma and in Texas. And then thereafter, I have a startup publishing house that's housed in New York City called Wang and Jean Publishers, and I take unsolicited manuscripts.
Okay.
I've offered a writing group that they've tolerated me now for 22 straight months, and it's a group of um established authors, emerging authors, and other professional types who are interested in writing various stories. And the types of stories that I'm entertaining will not be limited to the Western. Of course, Western is high on my list of priorities, but I'm interested in children's books. In fact, there's a gentleman who contacted me about a children's book, and he had a decision to make whether he should submit it to me or he should submit it to Penguin Random House. I said, well, this is Wang and Jean is a startup publisher. If you're looking for a wide distribution and you're looking for a connection to have you placed on the bestseller list, you probably should go to Penguin Random House rather
Yeah.
than Wang and Jean. But the one good thing about Wang and Jean is we do have an intellectual brain trust that we're really interested in reading the details of your manuscript and offering suggestions for editorial remarks and different changes that you might consider making to strengthen the story.
Yeah. We have a question from Mike. Wants to know, how does being an author yourself affect your approach to publishing other writers?
Uh, Thus far, I would say there's two ends of the spectrum. On the one end, I've had professional writers contact me to review manuscripts and to protect the identity of those writers. The manuscripts were subpar, and because they published elsewhere, they were a little bit reluctant to accept editorial comment, and so that didn't go well. And at the other end of the spectrum are the um, unpublished writers who may have talent, but they're not real sure about the process of how you would contact the publisher and you would ask to have your book published. You submit a query letter and maybe a synopsis. The manuscript has to be in a particular form, a particular length. And so those first time writers quite often don't know the mechanics, or they don't understand the elementary points of submitting a manuscript to a publisher. So
Yeah.
those are the two extremes.
Well, what inspired you to start your own publishing house?
I've always been the type of person to essentially take over, to not be a person to lay back and handle things from the subsidiary aspect of the tertiary access. I'm pretty much a person who takes over. As a Just another brief story. As a tennis father, years ago, I had a talented son, and he was playing in the nationals in tennis, and I was just there as a tennis parent, mind you. And the association had legal problems. They found out I was a lawyer, and they came and sought me out to help them get through some litigation. Well, that blossomed from being a tennis dad to becoming the general counsel for the entire association, and that includes certain international destinations. So I spent over 20 years as their general counsel, rewrote
Uh,
their constitution and bylaws, and eventually was inducted into the Tennis Hall of Fame. so,
wow.
um, so I had that reputation of taking things over where there's a need. Um, and in the area of publishing, I thought I wanted to take this area over, at least from my point of view. My grandsons are lurking in the background; they just cannot get over that we're on YouTube. But at any rate, um, I wanted to create a forum for writers to come and exchange ideas in a group setting. Our group is open to everyone. Anyone can be included if they contact us, and to help facilitate some of the issues that writers have. And then ultimately to present a resource to have different books published. And one area I'm particularly interested in is the younger people, the children, maybe in when they're 10, 12, teenagers, um, to bring them into the fold and create a forum for them to exchange ideas and for them to grow as writers. Now, as a former um, college professor, I can tell you that a lot of people have struggled with writers, with writing. It may not be your audience because your audience is probably very well read. You may have a lot of actual authors in your audience, et cetera, et cetera. But by and large, in our society, there are very few effective writers. And one of the reasons is there are very few effective teachers. The language is taught um, as a set of rules. I like to say that it's taught by grammar lawyers. Uh, but unfortunately, the English language is really not just a set of rules. The English language is a spoken language. It originally was a spoken language. It has its own music. And if you hear that music as a writer from an early age, it's easier for you to write more effectively. So when I teach writing to younger people, I teach it as a spoken language. And when they grasp the music, for example, if they grasp the sound that an introductory phrase makes, the sound that parenthetical expressions make, the sound of the subordinate clause, when they grasp that sound, later they will learn the rules that pertain to that music, but they need to hear the music. I say it's analogous to listening to your favorite popular song. If you listen to your favorite popular song in monotone, it's not a song at all.
Well,
Similarly, if you write if you write in the English language, but you're writing in a monotone, um, it's not effective writing. The page has to embrace the musicality of the language that's inherent in the spoken language. So those are just some of the ideas uh, of why I decided to go into publishing.
what role do you see small presses like yours playing in the future of the Western literature?
I think the main word is survival. The first thing that we need to survive, and it's difficult to survive financially. Uh, Wide segments of the population um, don't even read. They certainly don't read books. Years ago, when I used to take the subway, I'm a little bit older now, but years ago, when I say years ago, in the 80s, you'd get on a subway and you would see that probably half the people were reading. They're either reading the newspaper, they're reading books. If you get on the subway today, nobody's reading. There's no
Yeah, no,
reading.
it's amazing how society has changed in just a short period of time.
Yes, you'll see them on the glowing screen of the iPhone,
Yeah,
but you won't see them reading. So that's the first challenge. And that's profound. And then the second challenge is to generate the sales volume. And I mean, I've heard some of my colleagues have some interesting ways to resolve that issue in terms of publishing books in a series, multi-author series, brings the followers of each author to the series, and that's a way to um, create a hyper exponential sales volume. But as the individual author with a standalone book, that's a tall task. If you want to, if you want to write stories that make genuine contributions. Now, if you want to write trashy novels, easily accessible novels, pornographic novels, things like that, it's probably easier to generate sales volume. But that's an issue that we're still looking at.
Yeah. How can other writers submit to your publishing company?
They can contact me at James, the letter C, one word, at wjpublishing.com. James C at wjpublishing.com.
All right. What qualities do you look for specifically when you're considering a Western for publication?
The first thing I look for is effective writing. And I find that most writers are under pressure in the setup of the story. They're under pressure from the lead paragraph on, and then they don't catch a stride, a cadence until they're a little bit later in the story because they're under enormous pressure in the lead. Because they know if you fail at the lead, then the story as a whole is likely to collapse. Um, your editor's typically not going to spend much time reading a story where the lead is lacking. So I find that most writers are under pressure trying to put together the lead paragraph and even the lead sentence. And so when I see a book that's well written, um, that's pretty much what I'd be looking for. I can tell you that the first book that I wrote that I published with Cheryl Pearson, I submitted it to her in the third person, and she said, "Oh, I like the story." She said, "But you got to switch it to the first person reflective, which means you have to write it over again." And it was what's called a contract of adhesion, which is either you switch the story to the first person reflective, or we don't publish it.
Yeah,
so that that gives the that gave me all the guidance I needed. So
yeah,
you have to have a writer that's able to respond to editorial comment. Let's put it that way.
yeah. What are some of your biggest influences as a writer as far as the kind of work you like to read?
I've read just about everything. I started out as a kid reading a lot of Hemingway, um, but I've been through Russian writers, and I've been through various stages. Went through a stage where I was reading the black writers like Jimmy Baldwin, um, Toni Morrison, and Maya Angelou. Um, went through a Faulkner stage, various stages. And when I get into a particular stage, I try to exhaust just about everything that writer's written. I go through a Hemingway phase. I'm reading Hemingway exhaustively, and so on and so forth. Went through an F. Scott Fitzgerald phase, various phases.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite Western novels and authors?
Um, Alive. I like um, I like James Reesner,
Hmm.
and I like Cheryl Pearson. I like Livia a little bit, not
Yeah,
quite as much as James, but I like her a little bit. I was a judge 2 years ago of the best Western novel for Western fictioners, so I got a chance to see quite a wide variety of contemporary writers, and they're all very strong writers. So
yeah,
I wouldn't. I wouldn't single out any of them. They're very strong writers. I'm very fortunate to be included in that group of Western writers.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Western character in fiction or in film?
Uh, I would say that I would plead the fifth on that. I don't want to really talk about. I don't want to really single out particular writers or characters because um, there's just such a broad array, and
Yeah.
I don't want to favor one over the other. But I mean, I like James Reasoner, and but there's so many writers, so many of those Western writers of my colleagues, and that are very strong, and I appreciate them very much, frankly. And there's
Yeah.
some that have great reputations that I don't think they're that strong as writers, frankly. We're not going to talk about them either.
Well, if you could have a conversation with a historical figure from the Old West, who would it be?
Oh, let's see. On what level?
Or just a conversation like we're having now?
Just like
Just talking to somebody.
what did it feel like to live during that period of time, or what did you go through? Or I would say, Lincoln, and then I would say probably um, Grant. If you're looking for like your common figures, I would say I'd ask questions like, "How did you get from point A to point B?" For example,
Yes.
in Stagecoach Justice, Mary Fields she's in Ohio,
Yeah.
and she was a slave, and this is prior to the emancipation. But she manumitted, and she took on with the Ursuline nuns in Ohio, where she met the protagonist of my story, who formed a mission for Blackfeet girls in Montana. Um, and there at one point in her story, she goes from Ohio to Montana. And the question that bothered me was, how do you get from point A to point B in the early 1800s? The terrain is rocky between Ohio and Montana. You certainly can't take a stagecoach from Ohio to Montana. There's no body of water connecting Ohio and Montana. The railroad lines are um, fragmented across the country. You can't go from train from Ohio to Montana. So how in the world did she get from Ohio to Montana? That was the question, and that bothered me endlessly. And all the writers that I researched when I researched the story skipped that issue
Hmm.
of how did she get from point A to point B. I can't write a story unless I know how she got from point A to point B, because to me it's hideous.
Yeah.
It's not complete historical research if you can't even say how this character got from point A to point B. And I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't figure it out.
Hmm.
Finally, I solved the problem. I thought, now the Ursuline nuns in the early 1800s were very, very, very careful to document their biographies, their leading characters in that um, level of Catholicism. So I thought maybe I should go to the protagonist to find out how this nun got from point A to point B. This nun suffered from respiratory problems, and she was trying to face the wilds of Montana, those very cruel winters, with this respiratory problem. And she got case of pneumonia. They sent for Stagecoach Mary to help doctor her back to health. The question is, how did she get there? And so I thought, well, let's research the nun's biography to find out how she got there. And the nun's biography was in the archives of the Princeton University Library. That's where I found the answer. Princeton University Library archives. And in her biography, she tells us how she got from Ohio using a combination of stagecoaches, trains, and boats. Uh, Stagecoaches south, not west, south to a train line part of the way, another stagecoach um, from that train line. The name of the train line escapes me right now. From that train line to Miles City. Miles City, Montana was a hub in the early 1800s. Um, from Miles City, she took a stage to a body of water that she crossed. Um, she crossed on a boat, and then she got another stage from Helena into Cascade, Montana, and that's how she did it. A combination of stagecoaches, horseback, railroad, switching back to stagecoaches, horseback, boats, and then ultimately stagecoaches. So you couldn't go by one mode of transportation. So the thinking, our modern mentality of thinking that you can get on one mode of transportation and get from point A to point B. So I have to switch that mentality back to an 1800s mentality where you have to use various modes of transportation to get from any point A to point B in the country. That was the answer.
Yeah.
So I would talk to her about questions like that.
Yeah. What do you think makes a great Western story?
I think, like any story, I think conflict between the characters that raises a dramatic question um, that the characters have to resolve. And
Yeah.
in those conflicts and in the resolution of the dramatic question gives us an opportunity to get to the universals, to use symbolism to get to the universals. And like we discuss in this writers group I have, we have to discipline ourselves to write in concrete language and um, to try to not lapse into abstractions or theoretical writing, which is hard for us to do because we're so wildly educated these days. And when you're educated, you are rewarded if you write in the abstract. I mean, you submit a paper in college or a dissertation for your doctoral degree, it's probably largely going to be theoretical, supported by various scholarly authority, but it's going to be written in the abstract. For this type of storytelling, um, the opportunities for symbolism in my view, lie in concrete language and not in the abstractions. And if you look at it from a spiritual point of view, think about creation. What did our creator create? Our creator didn't create words. Our creator didn't create abstractions or theories. Our creator created objects that you can touch, that you can see, that you can hear, um, that are available to our tactile senses. And if we're in touch with our spirituality, one of the easiest ways, perhaps, for a writer to bring that spirituality to his story is to write in the concrete, is to talk about those things that were created by the creator, the the earth, the trees, the sky, the stars, to write about those things, to put us in touch with that meditative side, the spirituality. That's my thought, anyway.
Yeah. Why do you think Westerns are still relevant today?
I think the word that best summarizes that is the word audacity. We as Americans are an audacious people, and in order to achieve what we have achieved um, throughout the Western era, we needed audacity. It takes audacity to face the West and to settle the West. Um, it takes audacity to fight the wars. It takes audacity. So audacity is an element that is has a narcotic effect. A narcotic effect. It's intoxicating. So that core of audacity in the Western story, I think, will make it immortal. Because I think audacity, as long as we have people who are reading stories, I think audacity is a commodity that is intoxicating.
Yeah,
Audacity. However, however, as far as the form of the genre is concerned, I think we have to be inclusive and we have to be flexible, including Western stories that are told um, in a different format than the quote unquote traditional Western. Those modifiers are tricky when we put a modifier in front of a particular genre. When we say a traditional Western, the word traditional is a modifier, and it signifies it. Perhaps there's a problem identifying what exactly is a Western. Why do we even need a modifier? Why is there a modifier like traditional or contemporary? I think Western is a big enough genre to be inclusive, to include new and evolving ways of writing Western stories from that era of our history.
yeah. What would you advice would you give to someone who's looking to have a western published?
Master master the written language. That's the first thing. The first thing that stands out for me is if you're a strong writer, I'm interested.
Yeah,
I'm interested in writing that achieves a certain level, um, that's written in concrete language. Uh, Again, I think the structure of the novel is something that we can debate. It's something that we can edit. But if a person isn't a strong writer, I don't think there's much that we can really talk about. So strong writing, um, compelling characters. The characters are probably the most important part of the story. Describing the character, describing the scenes, and then uh, not so much the stereotypical scenes that we've seen in some westerns, the barroom scenes and the batwing doors and the guns going off, and not so much that necessarily.
yeah.
Strong writing,
So you're not a big fan of all the western tropes necessarily, huh?
not necessarily.
Yeah. What's
I
one you wish you would? What is one you wish would go away?
Well, I can tell you that I had a story translated into German. That was interesting
Hmm.
because some of the English language doesn't translate verbatim into German, and it was interesting to see these are two college professors in Germany. I can't remember the exact university, but they're into American westerns, and they translate Western writers here, particular stories into German. And the interesting part about it is it's the concrete language, what we've been talking about,
Hmm.
that interests them. And even the title that I used for that particular story, they changed and they made the title completely concrete. And I thought about that. I said, the guys are right about that. I have a story written in concrete language, and then I have an abstract title, and they just changed the title and made it pulled concrete imagery from the story and made a title. I thought that was very interesting. But what moves them is strong concrete language.
What do you hope readers walk away with after finishing one of your books?
I would like them to walk away with the idea that there's something more to the story that than appears on the four corners of the page. That there is a universal, that there's symbolism that takes them to a larger universal thought. Now, what I'll do sometimes is I'll drop my ideas in the dialogue of the character. Like one thing that bothers me, I think bothers all of us, um, is this notion that we need political reform. Okay, so that's a big one that came flying into the interview. So how do we talk about that in the story? And how are we not too heavy-handed in the story so that we're letting the reader do the work? Basically, what we want the story to do is simply frame the question and trigger a debate. And if the story can achieve that, the story has done its job.
Yeah,
So when I say that that the story is going to mean more than it appears on the four corners of the page, I mean that I've had the reader do some of the work. I've suggested an issue. We need political reform, and I haven't told the reader what that political reform would look like. That's for all of the readers to debate. So sometimes I'll cheat a little bit, and I'll have the character drop that one in. And so in A Good Day to Die, they're talking about politicians. The characters are talking about politicians. I don't remember which character comes up with this line, but he says one of the characters said, "Well, it's the law, so therefore we get to follow. It's obvious. It's the law." And the other character says, "Well, you can't trust the law unless you write it yourself." So there's a thought dropped in the dialogue about political reform without saying, "Well, what do you mean? Which politicians are corrupt? How is the law corrupted? Who does it favor? Who does it disfavor? How should the system be changed?" It's just a question the dialogue frames to hopefully trigger debate beyond the four corners of that page. So
yeah.
there it is. That's what my hope is.
Okay. Well, what's next for you? Any upcoming books or projects in the work?
I'm working on three at the same time. So you hear some writers talk about writer's block. And I say, my God, I wish I would get a case of that because, boy, I am haunted at night with these ideas for stories. The characters invade my sleep. Uh, I'm not a fun person to be around while I'm writing. Very I'm very nasty, especially if it's not going well. It doesn't always go well. It is hard work. You have these long sits that go on for hours. A 12-hour sit, your body can't handle it. The back, the shoulders, just to write for 12 hours in one position on these sets is physically demanding. It's labor. It's not all inspiration, and it's haunting. And sometimes I thought, well, if you've got writer's block, then you're not haunted. So I haven't come across that one. So what's happening to me now is I get ideas for more than one story at the same time. So I'm in a point now where I have three stories I'm working on all at the same time because I got the ideas for three stories and they're just sitting there and I have to try to work on them interchangeably. And the next ones that I put out, I'll spend a little bit more time. I'll walk away from them and come back maybe a year later so that I give myself some editorial distance to work on the rewrites. If you'll notice from the five books I've published, there's been at least one book a year. Sometimes there's two books a year, and I envy.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm losing my power here. I said I I I'm envious of writers like James Reasoner. I think he's published over 100 books, I don't think I'm ever going to make that 100 books, but I'm working on 3 now to answer the question.
Okay. Well, what's the best way for viewers to find you and your work?
You can buy any of my books online on Amazon. I would recommend Barnfire and The Horse, those two.
All
Um,
right.
I think The Horse is probably my strongest story yet, but the Barnfire has it's a collection of, I don't know, 15 stories, and it's almost 1,000 pages. So there's a lot of storytelling in there that's um, pretty interesting, and I think it'll hold readers over for a while. So there's value in Barnfire. And if readers go on Amazon and they buy these books, I would encourage them to write reviews, post a review, because it helps sales volume. The Horse and Barnfire, those two.
All right. Yeah. Reviews always help.
Yeah, and if they want to communicate with me directly, again, they can write me at James C, one word, James, the letter C, at wjpublishing.com.
All right. Well, James, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show. Your work's breathing new life into the Western genre, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Matt. Awesome.
Sure. If folks, be sure to check out his novels and visit his website. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.